Her laughter cut through the room like glass. I was 62, standing in the same living room where we'd once played with dolls and birthday balloons, now dressed in pink ribbons and pastel bows for my sister's baby shower. Sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns over the tablecloth. The scent of vanilla cake hung in the air, mingling with perfume and chatter. For a moment, I almost believed the years of distance had faded, that forgiveness had bloomed quietly between us. I hosted her with every ounce of grace I could gather, thinking blood still meant bond. But when she stood to make a toast, her glass catching the afternoon light, her lips curved into that familiar, dangerous smile. "You know," she said, voice lilting with mock sweetness, "at least this baby decided to stay." Laughter rippled through the room before they understood. I froze, the air snapping cold around me. The sound that followed was not joy. It was the sound of glass breaking somewhere deep inside. I saw my husband's hand tighten on his knee. My mother's smile faltered but stayed, polite and petrified. The others glanced at one another, whispering behind napkins. I wanted to move, to speak, to stop the bleeding silence that followed. But my throat closed. The secret I had buried in hospital sheets years ago now stood naked before my family, dressed in her laughter. The cradle I'd hidden in the attic came to mind, the one I never used, still waiting under a blanket of dust. My palms trembled as I reached for the edge of the table. The world felt suddenly smaller, soundless except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant coo of her guests congratulating her on finally getting what she deserved. Someone pressed play on a soft song to ease the tension. The melody of violins filled the air, but it only sharpened the silence between us. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the mantel, face pale, eyes wide, mouth trembling. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her warmth had drained away, leaving only the outline of a host whose home had turned against her. "Did you have to say that?" I whispered when she passed near me, pretending to refill her drink. She leaned in close enough that her perfume, sickly sweet, artificial, filled my lungs. "You should have told them yourself," she murmured. "Secrets rot when you bury them too deep." Her words slithered like a confession disguised as care. I wanted to scream, to tell her that some pain belongs to silence, not spectacle. Instead, I smiled, a brittle, breaking kind of smile, and walked to the kitchen before tears betrayed me. I could still hear laughter from the other room, now nervous and forced, clinking glasses trying to drown discomfort. Inside the kitchen, the smell of cake icing hit me again, sugary and nauseating. I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself. The house seemed to hum with memory. Our mother humming lullabies, my father fixing light bulbs, the echo of footsteps from years long gone. Home had once meant safety. Now it was an open stage. I grabbed my phone, pretending to check a message, but the screen only showed my reflection again. Eyes rimmed red, throat tight. A voice recording started accidentally as my finger brushed the screen. I caught her voice faintly from the next room, laughing again, and for some reason, I didn't stop the recording. Maybe I wanted proof that this moment was real, that cruelty could sound so casual. I returned to the living room when the guests began gathering for photos. She smiled at me as if nothing had happened, her arm resting possessively on our mother's shoulder. The flash from the camera lit her face, radiant, unbothered. Mine looked like a ghost beside her. "I'm proud of you," I said quietly, the words tasting of ash. "I hope you never know what it feels like to lose everything you wanted." She blinked, unprepared for the calm in my tone. "You always make things dramatic," she replied, laughing again. "It was just a joke." A joke. That was how she erased years of grief, how she turned my silence into entertainment. The word echoed in my skull as people clapped and posed and smiled through the fractures. When the guests finally began to leave, the room looked wrecked. Balloons half deflated, crumbs on the floor, the faint scent of flowers wilting in vases. My husband touched my arm. "You don't have to stay," he whispered. But I stayed. I needed to stand in the ruins of what once felt like home. The cradle in the attic, the mirror on the wall, the laughter still ringing in my ears, they all formed one truth. Betrayal never comes from strangers. It walks through your front door, smiling, bearing gifts. I gathered the torn ribbons from the table, folding them slowly until my hands stopped shaking. Behind me, she said something to our mother in a low voice, both pretending not to see me. I turned off the lights one by one, each click marking an end. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should. The sky had dimmed, bruised with evening. My phone buzzed. A new message, her name flashing. I didn't open it. Instead, I saved the accidental voice recording and locked my screen. Everyone knew my pain before I spoke. Silence lingered louder than her laughter. For 3 days I couldn't leave the bed. The house felt too alive, too full of echoes that didn't belong to me anymore. Rain pressed against the windows, soft and steady, like a pulse reminding me that time was still moving even if I wasn't. The sheets clung to me with the faint chill of sweat and grief. Every sound in the house, the clock ticking, the floorboards settling, felt like it was waiting for me to speak, and I had nothing left to say. I reached for the silver bracelet on my nightstand, the one I'd bought years ago for the baby, who never came. My fingers traced its worn engraving until the letters blurred. The metal was cold, textured against my skin, a reminder that some promises outlive the people who made them. I'd once thought it would circle a tiny wrist, catching sunlight in a stroller somewhere. Now, it was just another object that carried more memory than purpose. By the 4th morning, I called the clinic. They gave me an appointment that afternoon. I almost didn't go, but guilt feels heavier in stillness. The therapist's office smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. She smiled gently, too practiced to be warm. "Tell me what happened," she said. Her pen moved before I spoke. I told her about the laughter, the party, the way my sister's eyes never blinked as she exposed me. She listened, nodding in the rhythm of someone collecting data, not confessions. "It's not your fault," she said when I finished, but her tone carried more duty than belief. I nodded anyway. That's what therapy is sometimes, people trading words for the illusion of control. That night, I found 3 missed calls from my sister, then 5. Then one message. "You're overreacting. It was a joke. You always take things too seriously." Each word burned as it appeared on my screen. I deleted the messages, blocked her number, and for the first time in years, turned off my phone completely. Mother left a voicemail too. Her voice trembled between affection and avoidance. "She didn't mean it like that," she said. "You know how she gets when she's nervous." I didn't respond. The rain grew heavier outside, slapping against the glass like it wanted in. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the storm instead of sleeping. The next day, I went to the attic. Dust floated like pale ghosts in the narrow shaft of light from the single window. The cradle was still there, covered in an old quilt, the fabric soft but frayed. I ran my hand along its edge, feeling the grooves carved by time. That cradle had been a secret, just like my loss. I had told no one when the pregnancy ended, not even my husband at first. Some silences are stitched so tight they become skin. I knelt beside it, the wooden floor biting into my knees. The photo frame I'd hidden beside the cradle still held the sonogram, blurry, fragile, a promise paused. I pressed my forehead to it, the glass cold and unforgiving. The rain tapped on the roof above, a rhythm of memories I could neither keep nor let go. When I returned downstairs, the world looked different, smaller. I cleaned the kitchen counters just to hear something move under my control. I washed dishes that weren't dirty. I made tea I didn't drink. Grief makes rituals out of useless acts. That evening, my husband tried to speak. "You should talk to her," he said softly. "Maybe she didn't mean—" "She did," I interrupted. My voice startled both of us. It came out sharp, solid. "She meant every word." He hesitated, rubbing his hands together. "She's your sister." "I know." The truth hung there, heavy. And that's what makes it worse. Later that night, I found myself back in bed, the bracelet looped around my wrist again. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes blurred. The rain had stopped, leaving the world too quiet. The stillness wasn't peace. It was pressure, waiting for me to crack. Somewhere downstairs, a loose shutter banged against the frame, the sound hollow and rhythmic, like an unanswered heartbeat. I closed my eyes and pictured her face at the shower. How easily she smiled while unraveling me. There had been a glint of satisfaction, quick and cruel. I realized then that she didn't want an apology. She wanted control. Her laughter had been her proof of power. The therapist had asked me what I needed to heal. I hadn't known then, but now, lying in the dark, I whispered to the ceiling, "I need her to understand what she's done." The words barely left my lips, but they felt like a vow. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, pale and thin. I reached for my phone again, not to call her, but to check my next appointment. Healing, they say, begins with small choices. Sometimes it begins with none at all. Her apology felt like a second betrayal. Money became the new language of affection. It started with a knock on the door one late afternoon. The light outside was dimming, soft gold spilling through the window, and for a moment I almost believed peace had come to visit. But it was her, smiling, polite, carrying a paper bag of muffins like some token of apology. I invited her in because manners are armor when forgiveness feels impossible. She placed the bag on the counter, glancing around as though the house still belonged to her too. "I've been meaning to see you," she began, voice dipped in warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to fix things, but—" She hesitated just enough to sound vulnerable. "I'm in a little trouble, only temporary." I should have stopped her there, but guilt softens the spine. I asked, "What kind of trouble?" "Debts? Just short-term chaos?" She smiled faintly. "You've always been better with money." Her words landed heavy, dressed as flattery. I poured coffee, trying to breathe through the tension. The scent of roasted beans and lemon polish filled the kitchen, a calm too fragile to trust. We sat across from each other, separated by more than the table. I noticed her wrist. She wore a bracelet like mine, silver but newer, shinier. The sight made my stomach twist. "I just need a small favor," she said. "I'll pay it back by next week." "How much?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. 2,000, maybe 3. You won't even notice it missing." I laughed softly, not from humor, but disbelief. "You think money fixes what you broke?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "I think forgiveness looks better when it's practical." That line clung to the air. "Forgiveness," she said, as if it were a transaction. When she left, I went straight to my laptop, opened my bank account. The glow of the screen painted the room in sterile light. Numbers appeared, ones I hadn't written, withdrawals, transfers, a total of $20,800 missing. The ledger showed a familiar name listed as an authorized assistant. My heart dropped. Her name. I stared at the screen, scrolling through the details again and again, hoping it was a glitch, a misread digit. But there it was. A digital scar. The reference ID beside her name looked almost smug in its precision. I felt the room tilt slightly, like the air had turned against me. When my husband came home, I confronted him. "Did you give her access to our account?" He froze, guilt flashing across his face before the words came. "She said you told her to, just for a transfer." I stepped back, the sound of his voice distant, muffled. "You believed her?" "She's your sister," he said softly, as if that explained everything. I pressed my palms to the counter, the cold surface grounding me. The stakes were no longer emotional. They were real, numbered, visible. Betrayal had taken shape in digits and decimals. That night, I filed a review request with the bank. The clerk's tone on the phone was courteous, but clinical. "We'll investigate," she said. "Please note the reference number, ID 47B2. I wrote it down on the back of an old receipt, the ink smudging under my thumb. When I hung up, the silence in the house felt loud again, pressing in from every corner. The next morning, I found her text waiting. "Don't make this ugly. I'll fix it soon." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the Ledger app again, watching the faint shimmer of my balance, like light flickering on broken glass. I printed the statement, the paper warm as it slid out of the tray. Proof had texture. It crinkled under my fingertips. I folded it carefully, tucked it into a file marked with her name. I'd kept evidence before, but this time it felt different. Necessary. Protective. Later, I stood in the living room where she'd laughed about my miscarriage. The memory came uninvited. Back then, she'd stolen my dignity. Now, she'd stolen my security. It was almost poetic, the way her betrayals evolved. Emotional, then financial. Each one cutting deeper, more practical, more permanent. I looked at the bracelet around my wrist, the one I'd once traced for comfort. The silver caught the afternoon light. I realized it wasn't a symbol of love anymore. It was a ledger entry of its own, proof of what I kept giving away. When my husband tried to speak again, I stopped him. "No more favors," I said. "Not for her, not for anyone." He nodded quietly, the guilt settling like dust. I turned off the lights one by one until only the soft glow of the computer screen remained. Its reflection lingered on the glass of the window, cold, sterile, unblinking, the kind of light that doesn't forgive. That night, I made a silent promise. Never again would she hold power over my life. Her signature sat where mine should have been. Truth called when I least wanted to answer. The phone rang just as I was folding laundry, soft rain tapping against the window. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in the persistence made me pick up. "This is Marianne from the clinic," the voice said, hushed but urgent. My breath caught. The clinic. The one place tied to everything I'd buried. "I'm calling because someone accessed your records," she continued, words careful, almost apologetic. "You'll want to come in." For a moment, all I heard was the rain. My hands tightened around the fabric in my lap, the scent of lavender detergent rising faintly. That smell always calmed me. Today it didn't. "Who?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "I can't say over the phone, but you'll see the name when you come." By the time I reached the clinic, the air outside had turned heavy and gray. The receptionist offered a polite smile, unaware of the tremor under my calm. Marianne led me to a small office with flickering lights and a vase of fake flowers that had seen better years. She slid a paper across the desk. "Record log reference C1436. The black ink glared at me. My sister's name, right there, printed, time-stamped. It felt like the world split in two, before and after that line of text. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stared. "We take confidentiality very seriously," Marianne said quietly. "You can file a report if you wish. This could qualify as a breach." Her tone softened, but my thoughts spiraled. She'd done it deliberately. She wanted to see it. The file, the loss, the exact medical notes that had defined the worst day of my life. Jealousy wasn't loud. It was invasive. She'd wanted what I couldn't have, and when she couldn't have it either, she made it her story to tell. "I'd like a copy," I said finally, "for my own record." Marianne hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. I'll redact details for policy reasons, but this is your right." She printed a copy and handed it to me, the paper still warm. I caught a whiff of lavender again, this time from the air freshener mounted near the ceiling. The scent mixed with the sterile clinic air, oddly familiar, oddly cruel. I left the office clutching the file folder like it was evidence of a crime. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky hung low, swollen with unfinished storm. My car smelled faintly of the same lavender. Ironic, I thought, how betrayal always came perfumed. Halfway home, I pulled over. I couldn't drive. The file sat on the passenger seat, silent, accusing. I opened it, tracing her initials beside the time, 1436. So ordinary, so precise. She must have been sitting comfortably somewhere when she did it, clicking her way through my grief. I imagined her smirk, the same one from the shower, now behind a screen. When I got home, I placed the folder on my desk. My husband started to ask where I'd been, but the look on my face silenced him. "She read my records," I said flatly. She looked. He blinked, unsure how to respond. "Are you sure?" I slid the page toward him. He read the name, the time, the initials. His shoulders slumped. "You have to report this," he said. "It's not right." I nodded, but the decision had already formed in me like a steady pulse. I sat down at my computer and began typing. The clinic's online form asked for details: date, access ID, affected patient. My fingers moved fast. Certain. I listed the exact time, attached a scanned copy of the report, and hit send. A confirmation window popped up with a case reference number, E1127. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. There was no satisfaction, only a hollow kind of justice beginning to take shape. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. She'd taken pieces of my privacy for years through gossip and laughter. This time, she'd left a trail. As night fell, I sat in the quiet hum of the house. The lavender candle on the shelf flickered weakly, its scent clinging to the air. I blew it out, letting the faint smoke curl and fade. Some smells, I realized, don't comfort, they haunt. She turned my loss into her proof of control. Justice begins with paperwork, not apologies. The courthouse smelled of old air and polished wood. I stood in a line of strangers clutching documents, each of us carrying our private wars folded into manila envelopes. When my turn came, a clerk handed me a form titled Privacy Violation Complaint. The ink on the page looked colder than it should. A man in a gray suit approached, his tone calm but direct. "I'm Daniel," he said, "legal advisor for personal data cases. Let's sit." We found a corner table under flickering fluorescent light. I spread the papers across it, my hands shaking slightly. "She accessed my medical file," I began. He nodded, already scanning the document. "You'll need to file a complaint under the Institutional Privacy Statute, and," he looked up, "we can attach a restraining request too. Access limit." His voice steadied the room. For the first time in weeks, I felt like something solid existed beyond the chaos. "Do you think it'll stop her?" I asked. He paused, pen poised. "It'll set a line she can't cross without consequence. Whether she respects it, that's another story." We worked through the forms, page after page, his pen gliding with practiced rhythm. The scratch of ink became almost hypnotic, a counterpoint to the storm still buzzing in my chest. Each signature felt like reclaiming an inch of ground she'd taken. My handwriting wavered, but it was mine on record, mine against her. Daniel pushed the final document forward. "Sign here and here." His tone softened. "It's not about anger. It's about evidence." I signed. The paper had a faint grain to it, rough under my fingertips. The texture grounded me, pulled me out of the fog. When he stamped the last page with a round blue seal, the thud of rubber against paper sounded final, like a small heartbeat of justice. The embossed mark caught the light, edges raised. Official. Case number 4821C. "Keep this copy safe," he said. "The court will notify her legal counsel within 2 days. Expect pushback." Pushback came faster than that. By the end of the week, I received a letter from her lawyer. Sharp language dressed in civility. "My client expresses concern regarding your mental and emotional stability," it read. "She believes your actions stem from unresolved trauma." The words pulsed with arrogance. Unstable. That was their strategy, turning my grief into discredit. I felt the heat rise in my face as I read. I handed it to Daniel during our next meeting. He skimmed it, expression unreadable. "Intimidation, disguised as reason," he said simply. "Common tactic. Don't answer it directly. The order stands." But it did more than stand. It transformed something inside me. I realized this wasn't just a fight over boundaries. It was a war over truth itself. She wanted ownership of the narrative. I wanted peace. That night I sat at my desk and ran my fingers over the embossed seal again. It was cool to the touch, almost metallic, and its texture steadied me. My name beside the institution's, no longer whispered, no longer erased. It wasn't gossip now. It was record, proof. The next morning she called from an unknown number. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. "You think paper protects you?" she asked, her tone almost amused. "I'll show everyone what you're really like." "Then show them," I said quietly. "But remember, truth has witnesses now." She exhaled sharply, caught off guard by the calm in my voice. "You're ruining your own name," she hissed. "It's already mine," I replied. I hung up before she could speak again. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. The silence afterward felt earned. Later, Daniel emailed to confirm the filing was officially accepted. "Protective order approved, notice issued," the message read. I printed it, folded it carefully, and placed it behind the stamped document. The folder felt heavier than paper, like armor. I looked out the window. The city was drenched in early dusk, car lights sliding through the rain. I realized then that justice didn't roar. It wrote itself quietly, one line at a time, not with apologies, with ink. She vowed to destroy me through truth. Reputation became her new weapon. It started with a silence that wasn't quiet at all, the kind that hums behind your back when you walk into a room. At the grocery store, women I'd known for years suddenly found new interest in their phones. The cashier who once asked about my weekend now only nodded, eyes darting away. Even the neighbor across the street, who'd shared pie recipes and gossip with me for decades, crossed to the other side when she saw me outside. That's how I knew my sister had started again, only this time she didn't need laughter. She had words, invisible, viral, polished. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I saw the posts. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't need to. "Some people pretend to be victims," she'd written one night. "They hide behind paperwork and pity." The comments flooded in, hearts, sympathy, subtle approval. Everyone knew who she meant. The phrasing was too precise, the timing too cruel. Each sentence echoed the story she'd told once before, twisting my grief into performance. I printed every post, date and time included. The sound of the printer whirring filled the room, steady, clinical, proof in motion. I laid the sheets out across the table, their pale paper edges glinting in the afternoon light. It looked like evidence in a case I hadn't meant to build. My counselor called that evening after I'd canceled our last session. "You can't let her own the story," she said. "Document, don't react." "I don't want to fight her," I replied. "I just want her to stop." "She won't," the counselor said quietly, "but you can make sure she doesn't decide who you are." That night, I heard my phone buzz on the counter, an audio message from a number I didn't recognize. When I pressed play, her voice filled the kitchen, distorted slightly through the speaker. "She's unraveling again," she laughed to someone. "Poor thing thinks the world's against her." My stomach dropped. Even the sound of her laugh carried venom now. I replayed it once, then again, then stopped myself. Proof didn't need repetition. It just needed to exist. The next morning, I took the recording to the counselor's office. The room smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic, calm on the surface, but I could feel tension coiling inside me. She listened in silence, her brow tightening with every second. "Keep this," she said finally. "Don't delete it. Print a transcript. Note the date and sender. This isn't gossip anymore. It's defamation." I nodded, writing the details down. My hand shook only once. For the first time, the whispers had shape. They had sound. They could be traced, dissected, proved. When I left the office, the air outside felt heavier. Clouds rolled low, hanging like a curtain between me and the rest of the street. I passed two neighbors chatting by their mailboxes. One stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. "Afternoon," I said, forcing calm. They didn't respond, just that look, half curiosity, half fear. I realized then that isolation was her goal. Make me look unstable, and the truth would sound like paranoia. That evening, I printed the screenshots. each one marked by timestamp and profile ID. I kept them in a folder labeled Records, Com. The sound of the hole punch clicking through the paper was strangely satisfying. Sound was my ally now, the only honest witness. Every ping, every message, every breath she sent into the world became a breadcrumb leading back to her. At dinner, my husband tried to ease the silence. "Maybe people will see through it," he said, voice unsure. I looked up from my plate. "They won't," I said. "They love a scandal more than a story." He hesitated. "Then what will you do?" "End the silence," I said. "But not the way she expects." I opened my phone again that night, not to read her words, but to write mine, a single post, clear, factual, unflinching. "Truth doesn't need an audience," I wrote. "It just needs proof." I didn't name her either, but she would know. Everyone would. By morning, the comments had shifted. Quiet sympathy replacing mockery, hesitation replacing certainty. The first crack in her campaign. One neighbor even texted me, "I think I understand now." That was enough to start. I closed my laptop and stood by the window, watching the curtains move with the soft wind. The faint sound of a passing car echoed down the street. Mundane, but peaceful. Somewhere beyond it, I knew she was furious, because when whispers meet proof, they start to sound like confessions. The whispers turned into signatures on her downfall. HR called me into a room too bright to hide truth. The walls were white, too white, like someone thought clarity could be painted on. I sat across from Ms. Lane, the HR officer, her posture careful, her words measured. "We received an anonymous complaint," she began, sliding a folder across the table. "It alleges that you leaked patient records." I blinked. The sentence didn't make sense at first. "Leaked what?" I asked. She opened the folder. Inside was a printed email thread highlighted in yellow. My name appeared in bold beneath words like breach and violation. My throat tightened. I knew immediately whose fingerprints were all over this, even if her name wasn't written anywhere. "Your access logs have been reviewed," Ms. Lane continued, her tone softening. "They're clean. You didn't access or share any restricted data." She paused. "But someone wants this to look convincing." Her phrasing lingered. "Someone wants this." Not, "Someone believes this." It was intention, not accident. That's when I knew. My sister's whispers had found their way into the world of policy and paychecks. The office light buzzed faintly overhead, a low electric hum that made everything feel sterile. I stared at my ID badge clipped to my blouse, the photo smiling back from a time when I thought safety existed in routine. "Do you think my job's at risk?" I asked quietly. Ms. Lane leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Not yet. But you need to be cautious. HR can't control public perception. Keep documentation. If anything new surfaces, report it immediately." Documentation, proof, evidence. It always came back to the same trinity of survival. I nodded, forcing my hands to stay still as she handed me the printed report, reference entry HR 312. The texture of the paper felt heavy, almost waxy beneath my fingertips. I wanted to crumble it, but I couldn't. When the meeting ended, I lingered at the door for a moment. The smell of burnt coffee drifted from the break room down the hall, bitter and familiar. My mug still sat on my desk, half full and cold. The ordinary felt obscene after that conversation. I returned to my workstation, the open window of my inbox glowing on the monitor. My colleagues glanced up and quickly looked away. I knew what that meant. She'd spread it here too. The rumor had jumped from screens to mouths, from whispers to silence. I opened the email again, scrolling past each false claim. There were numbers, references, timestamps, 8:47, 9:12, 9:59. Times when I hadn't even been logged in. I printed them, stapled each page, and slid them into a folder marked Work. My defense was becoming an archive. Just before leaving, Ms. Lane reappeared at my cubicle. She placed a small card on my desk. "If this escalates," she said softly, "call this number. It's internal legal. They can step in if defamation becomes a factor." Her eyes held quiet empathy, but also warning. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the tile like a metronome. The sound followed me all the way to the elevator. In the parking lot, I sat inside my car for a long minute, engine off, heart running faster than the clock. My reflection in the windshield looked thinner, smaller. This was no longer about family or shame. It was about survival inside systems that recorded every move. I picked up my phone and opened the latest message from my counselor. "You're doing the right thing. Keep boundaries firm." I typed back, "She's crossing them faster than I can draw them," then deleted it before hitting send. Some words were better left unrecorded. At home, I dropped the HR file onto my desk beside the legal complaint folder. The pile had grown thick, paper bending under its own weight. Each document carried a trace of her, a signature without ink. As evening light faded, the glow from my computer monitor filled the room. I checked my pay stub out of habit, and that's when I saw it. A deduction listed as "Administrative Review Hold." My breath caught. She hadn't just targeted my name, she'd reached my paycheck. I closed my eyes, feeling the buzz of the fluorescent light behind them, sharp and endless. Somewhere between rumor and institution, she'd found a way to wound without touching me. Her lies entered my paycheck and nearly my sanity. Numbers told the story better than words ever could. The first call to the auditor felt like a confession. My voice shook as I explained that the money wasn't missing. It had been redirected. Quietly. Over months. He didn't sound surprised. "These things usually leave a pattern," he said. "You can't hide arithmetic." His calmness unnerved me. I gave him access to my old joint accounts, the ones she'd once convinced me to streamline for convenience. I remembered the day she said it, her smile rehearsed, her tone soothing. "Just one signature. It'll make things simpler." Simpler for her, I realize now. Within a week, the numbers started talking. Line by line, they formed a kind of diary, dates, amounts, transfers. $4,700 here, $6,200 there, another $5,500 soon after. I stared at the totals, the way they seemed to breathe under the fluorescent light of the auditor's office. $16,400 in all. My hands went cold. He printed the audit summary and slid it toward me. "These are clean traces," he said. "Every transaction links back to an account under her name, and," he pointed to a column of reference entries, "each has a timestamp. That's verifiable." His tone wasn't cruel, but it had finality, the kind that lands like a verdict. The paper was thick, rough against my fingertips. Texture grounded me when my mind wanted to float away. I read the first line twice. "Transfer ID 9821A, 09:43 a.m. Cleared." I could almost hear her voice layered beneath those numbers, mocking my trust. "She used access privileges from before the separation," he continued. "That's how she moved funds without immediate alerts. It's considered internal misappropriation." He paused. "You'll want to file this with your previous case file. The crossover strengthens your claim." Claim. That word made it sound civil, procedural, like this wasn't a wound but paperwork. "What happens now?" I asked. He looked up from his notes. "Now you decide if you still want to believe she'll stop." I didn't answer. The air in the room smelled faintly of ink and toner. The low hum of the printer filled the silence between us. He stapled the pages together, his movements precise, methodical. I envied that detachment, the luxury of not feeling what you're documenting. When I left his office, the evening had already turned gray. The city lights flickered on one by one, each one a small confession in glass. I sat in my car, the report open on my lap. The pages fluttered in the air from the vent, like they wanted to escape being evidence, but I couldn't let them. They were the truth now, unforgiving, undeniable. Back home, I laid the report beside the HR file, the clinic breach, the court documents. The pile had grown thick enough to bow the table slightly. The smell of paper had become a constant in my house, sharp and dry. I ran my hand over the folder marked Finance, feeling the ridges of the embossed seal, proof. Didn't heal, but it steadied the shaking. Later that night, I called Daniel, the legal advisor. "It's confirmed," I said. "Transfers, dates, everything." "Good," he replied. "You've built your foundation. Now we build your defense." I hesitated. "And if she denies it?" "She can deny words," he said, "not numbers." I hung up and stared at the report again. Each digit felt heavier than memory. There was no laughter here, no rumor, no spin, just math. And math doesn't lie. I realized what frightened me most wasn't the theft. It was how long I'd lived without noticing. Betrayal doesn't start loud, it starts logical. "It'll make things simpler," she'd said. And I'd agreed. The next morning, I made 3 copies, one for my records, one for the police, one sealed in an envelope marked Backup. The envelope crackled as I pressed it shut, its edges coarse beneath my thumb. For the first time, I felt like the truth had texture, something you could actually hold. Outside, the sky was pale, the light thin but steady. I locked the door, report in hand, and drove toward the precinct. Every red light felt like a test of will. Every passing reflection showed a face learning to stop flinching. Her greed finally left fingerprints I could hold. My voice shook, but my evidence didn't. The precinct felt colder than I expected. Metal benches, buzzing lights, the faint hum of printers chewing through reports. The air carried that sterile mix of disinfectant and old coffee, sharp enough to sting my nose. I clutched the folder to my chest like it was a heartbeat, not paper. When the officer at the desk called my name, I followed him down a corridor lined with glass doors and echoing footsteps. Behind one, a detective looked up from his desk. "Marsh," he said simply. "You're the one with the audit trail?" I nodded and placed the folder in front of him. He flipped it open, eyes scanning line by line. $16,400 total, he murmured. Multiple transfers, confirmed account linkage. His tone wasn't surprise, it was validation. "You've done half our job." Those words landed heavier than they should have. For months I'd been told to move on, to forgive, to let family stay family. Now, a stranger in a badge finally spoke like the truth was measurable. I sat quietly as he assembled each document into an evidence bag, labeling them with reference entry 42A19. The click of his pen sounded like punctuation at the end of a long, chaotic sentence. "Tell me again how she had access," he said. "She was added as an authorized assistant," I replied. "Then the records breach, then the withdrawals." He scribbled notes, eyes never leaving the page. "Pattern fits. Fraud and misuse of medical data." He leaned back. "This isn't small. Once we file, she'll be summoned for questioning." For a moment, I just stared at him. The words were simple. Summoned for questioning. But they felt like a reckoning. A line crossed in ink. My pulse slowed, steady for the first time in weeks. "You'll really move forward?" I asked. "We already have," he said, signing the form. "You'll get a copy for your records." He slid the document toward me, signature still drying. The form was plain, bureaucratic, almost unimpressive. Yet my hand trembled when I took the pen. Each line I signed wasn't just acknowledgement. It was reclamation. My handwriting felt stronger with every stroke. I wrote my name twice, printed it once, then handed it back. Control, once stolen, was returning one signature at a time. He sealed the evidence bag, his gloves squeaking softly against the plastic. "This'll go to financial crimes," he said. "They'll cross-check timestamps with her access history. Expect a follow-up within 72 hours. 3 days, I repeated quietly. It sounded short, but I knew time stretches when justice waits. As he stood to leave, I caught the faint scent of his aftershave mingling with the disinfectant. Something crisp, clean, almost too sterile. It reminded me of hospitals, of recovery that doesn't erase the scar. "We'll contact you directly," he added. "And, for what it's worth, I've seen cases like this end the right way. I wanted to believe that, but right and fair aren't always twins. Outside the station, the sky had turned colorless, the kind of late afternoon where light fades without ceremony. I walked to my car slowly, the folder lighter now that its contents lived elsewhere. Somewhere official, somewhere safe. A faint breeze carried the smell of wet asphalt, mixing oddly with the lingering sterility of the station. It stayed with me. Proof had a scent. At home, I placed the carbon copy on my desk beside the others. The paper smelled faintly of toner and something sharper, like truth made tangible. I realized this was what exposure felt like. Not victory, not relief, but air finally clearing after a long confinement. Still, fear lingered at the edges. Exposure brings both light and heat, and I could already feel the warmth of retaliation rising. I lit a candle without thinking, the small flame trembling against the draft. The scent of wax tried to cover what the station had left on me, but it couldn't. The sterile trace clung, unyielding, a reminder that justice doesn't arrive clean. It arrives disinfected, examined, stamped. When the phone rang that night, I froze. A withheld number. I let it ring out. Some calls deserve silence. My evidence would speak louder than my voice ever could. Justice had a scent, sharp and sterile. Secrets crave attention. Now they had an audience. It started with a call just after dawn. The sun had barely lifted, light spilling weakly through the blinds when my phone rang. I answered before the second tone. "This is Claire," the voice said, steady, professional. "I'm a journalist with the Chronicle. I believe you should know someone sent us your file." The word file made my stomach tighten. "What kind of file?" I asked. "Documents, screenshots, legal correspondence. It claims you're fabricating allegations for money." Her tone softened. "But I've been reviewing the metadata. Something doesn't add up." For a second, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen, its glow cutting through the dimness of my kitchen. I remembered the last time I'd felt this light, back at the police station, under fluorescent tubes that hummed like accusations. Now, that same brightness pressed against me again, asking if I was ready to be seen. "She's using the media," I said quietly, "turning the case into spectacle." "That's what it looks like," Claire replied. "But the timestamps on the transfers you reported, $4,700, $6,200, and $5,500, match the evidence I verified through your auditor's report. I've seen the trail. It's real." I closed my eyes. The scent of burnt toast filled the air, a reminder I'd left breakfast untouched. "What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to print the truth," she said, "but I need your consent to use your initials." I hesitated. Once you let the story breathe, you can't pull it back. "Do it," I whispered. "Let it out." Later that day, the headline appeared on the Chronicle's website. "Family Feud Becomes Privacy Case." A single sentence beneath it. "Authorities confirm financial misappropriation and digital impersonation under active review." My hands trembled as I read. For once, the spotlight didn't burn. It illuminated. I imagined her reading it, her smile curdling. The same woman who built her reputation on charm and performance, now watching her own reflection distort across the newsfeed. Every quote she'd twisted now faced context. Every rumor she'd planted was uprooted in daylight. Claire called again that evening. "The story's gaining traction," she said. "2 local stations picked it up. You might want to avoid comments online for now." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Comments are her weapon, not mine." "She'll likely respond," Claire warned. "Maybe a statement." "She always does," I said. "She needs noise to survive." Outside, flash bulbs flared from parked cars. A neighbor's teenage son was taking photos, pretending to text. The camera clicks echoed faintly, like insects against glass. I pulled the curtain shut. It didn't matter anymore. The truth was public. What she'd once whispered in corners now played across screens. Still, exposure had its own cost. My phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from colleagues, from distant relatives, from strangers claiming solidarity or judgment. Some offered sympathy, others demanded gossip. I didn't reply to any. The light was finally working for me, but too much of it still blinded. By evening, the printed edition landed on my doorstep. The headline stretched across the front page, bold and final. Beneath it, a grainy photo of the courthouse where my report had been filed. I ran my hand over the paper. It felt warm from the sun, textured like something alive. The ink left a faint smudge on my fingertips, proof that the story existed outside of screens, beyond manipulation. Claire's article ended with a single line that silenced me. Truth doesn't shout, it survives. I folded the newspaper, placed it beside the folder labeled Evidence, and sat back. For the first time, her laughter wasn't the loudest voice in the room. When night came, I stood by the window and watched the glow of streetlights ripple across the quiet street. The neighborhood felt altered, half aware of what had happened. Somewhere out there, she was realizing that silence, too, can go viral. Her silence went viral. The hall smelled of old wood and judgment. Every sound carried, heels on marble, papers sliding, the creak of benches that had heard too many broken promises. I stood at the center, palms cold against the railing. Across the aisle, she sat poised, the same sister whose lies had hollowed entire years out of me. Her composure looked rehearsed, but her eyes darted toward every whisper. The judge adjusted his glasses, tapping the gavel once. "Order," he said, though the air already held its breath. The clerk read the record number, reference entry 31C72, before placing the document on the bench. The scent of aged paper mingled with something sharper, the faint polish on the wood, the residue of disinfectant from the morning cleanup. Every sense felt heightened, as though the room itself waited to choose a side. "Withdrawals confirmed," the judge read. $4,700 on April 12th, $6,200 on May 9th, $5,500 on June 3rd, total $16,400. Account formerly joint, now restricted. His voice didn't waver. Mine nearly did. My attorney nudged the folder toward me. Inside was the protection order, filed 09:22 a.m., County Court. The embossed seal pressed through the paper, rough beneath my thumb. That small ridge of texture reminded me of Chapter 5, of the first signature that said, "I mattered enough to be protected." She crossed her legs, leaning back with a smirk I used to mistake for confidence. "She's obsessed," she said to no one in particular, but loud enough for the panel to hear. "She can't stand not being admired." The judge's gavel struck once. "You'll wait to speak." My lawyer stood. "We submit Exhibit Reference 12B, the verified voice recording recovered from the defendant's device." Her smirk faltered. The technician pressed play. A low hum filled the room, then her laughter, a sound once familiar, now foreign and cruel. "She thinks she can win," her voice said in the recording. "She doesn't even know what's coming." The courtroom fell silent, except for that echo. Her laughter circling the ceiling like something trapped between truth and consequence. When it stopped, even the light through the high windows felt sharper, angled as though dissecting her. "She can't prove intent," she muttered, but her words landed without force. The judge looked at me. "Would you like to add anything before we close this session?" I hesitated, then stood. My voice trembled at first, then steadied. "Your Honor, I spent years believing silence kept peace, but silence isn't peace. It's surrender. She used it like a weapon, and I let her. Today, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I want it on record. She can't rewrite what happened." A murmur ran through the benches behind me. Someone whispered, "Good for her," and the phrase rippled softly, like wind through leaves. The judge nodded. "Noted." He signed the final page, ink scratching faintly against parchment. "This hearing recognizes sufficient cause to extend the protection order and refer financial discrepancies to criminal review." I exhaled. The sound was almost a sob, but it carried something stronger: release. Across the aisle, her shoulders tensed, the weight of exposure sinking in. When the gavel struck again, its echo rolled through the hall like thunder disguised as ceremony. The smell of the room, polish, paper, old air, wrapped around me. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling it imprint into memory. As people stood, the crowd buzzed with half-muted words. Finally, recorded proof: the sister. Each one chipped away at the myth she'd built around herself. Claire, the journalist, caught my eye from the back row. She mouthed, "It's done." I nodded. Done, but not over. Justice never ends in one room. It ripples outward, piece by piece. When I turned to leave, my hand brushed the edge of the wooden bench. Smooth where generations had leaned, scarred where they'd gripped in fear. I thought of that laughter again, once a ghost in my nights, now trapped in evidence, cold and mechanical. Outside, sunlight flooded the courthouse steps. Reporters murmured, cameras clicked, the world beginning to stitch its version of the truth. But for me, the story had narrowed to one pure note: vindication, stripped of noise. Her laughter ended where justice began. Truth doesn't heal, it burns first. The microphone crackled as I leaned toward it. My reflection shimmered faintly on its silver rim, distorted but whole. I could feel the pulse in my throat as the clerk said, "Please state your testimony." The courtroom dimmed around the edges. Only the bench ahead stayed sharp beneath the fluorescent lights. The rosary in my pocket pressed against my palm, its smooth beads grounding me in something older than fear. "I remember the first message," I began. "She wrote that I was unfit, unstable, ungrateful. She said the world deserved to see the truth about me." The words came out steady, though my voice trembled at the edges. "But she didn't show the truth. She created it." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I could hear the faint hiss of the microphone, like a breath between us all. I looked at her, sitting behind her lawyer, eyes darting, fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. Once, that same face smiled at me over birthday cakes and shared secrets. Now, it was a mask learning to crack. "She accessed my files, my finances, my patience," I said. "She twisted what she found until even I started to doubt myself." I stopped. "But doubt doesn't last when you have proof." Her lawyer rose. "Objection. Irrelevant narrative." "Overruled," the judge replied without hesitation. "She's testifying to motive." I looked down at the testimony sheet, reference entry 55A08, its lines filled with careful ink and months of restraint. My advocate whispered, "Take your time." His voice carried the kind of patience that comes from seeing too many stories like mine end unfinished. "I'll never forget June 3rd, I said. "The last withdrawal, $5,500. She said it was for family repairs, but the report traced it directly to her personal account. The day after, she posted online that I'd been suspended for fraud. I wasn't. She just made it believable enough." The audience murmured. The sound rolled through the room like a wave, breaking against the silence that followed. Her lawyer tried again. "My client acted under emotional distress." I cut him off. "Distress doesn't sign documents. Distress doesn't hack emails. People do." The judge raised his hand for quiet, but I could still feel the energy shift. My voice steadied. "For years, I thought justice was something you waited for. Today, I realized it's something you speak into existence." My advocate nodded faintly, encouraging me to continue. "She mocked me once," I said. "When I confronted her about the rumors, she laughed and said, 'Who would believe you?'" I looked straight at her now. "Everyone who's listening." The microphone hissed again, louder this time. It caught the rhythm of my breathing, amplifying it across the room. The sound wasn't frailty. It was survival rendered audible. "She used to say words were just wind," I said softly. "But words built her lies, and now words will undo them." Her lawyer folded his papers, pretending to check a note. The judge scribbled something across his pad. The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but something deeper had. The spell of fear that kept me quiet was gone. The audience leaned forward. I could see a woman in the front row nodding, her eyes glassy, as though she recognized the cost of silence too well. My advocate rested a hand on my shoulder again, not to steady me, but to anchor me to the moment. "You're doing fine," he whispered. I took one more breath. What she stole wasn't just money, it was my voice. "I'm taking it back." The judge looked up. "Thank you. You may step down." As I walked from the stand, the soft buzz of the microphone faded behind me. For the first time, I didn't flinch at the sound. It felt like closure. The rosary beads pressed again against my skin, warm now, as though they'd absorbed the heat of everything I'd just released. Her lawyer turned to whisper something to her, but she didn't respond. Her jaw tightened, eyes locked on the crowd that had shifted in tone, from curious to convinced. When the applause began, it wasn't loud at first, just a ripple of acknowledgement. But it grew, measured, deliberate, undeniable. She flinched when the crowd applauded truth. The judge's words landed heavier than I expected. For months, I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, the sound of justice, the shape of closure. But when it finally came, it was quieter than I'd imagined. The courtroom was filled with morning light, soft and unfiltered, stretching through high windows and spilling over polished wood. Dust floated through it like memory refusing to settle. "The court finds the defendant guilty," the judge said, voice measured, unflinching. "Guilty of privacy breach and financial fraud, restitution of $16,400, and 100 hours of community service." The numbers hung in the air. $16,400, every stolen dollar returned not just in currency, but in proof that truth can be counted. A few people gasped. One woman behind me whispered, "Finally!" My sister didn't speak. Her eyes fell toward the floor, her hands gripping the table's edge as if steadiness could still be borrowed. The weight she had carried in arrogance now turned into silence. For years, she'd worn confidence like armor. Now it cracked without sound. The judge continued, his tone final, yet not cruel. "This court recognizes the harm caused by sustained defamation and violation of confidentiality. The restitution order will be enforced immediately." The gavel struck once. The sound cut through everything, the whispers, the rustle of papers, the faint hum of the overhead lights. It echoed in my chest, like a pulse returning after years of arrest. I stood still, holding the folder that had followed me from one institution to another. Its edges were worn now, pages marked with signatures, timestamps, and evidence IDs. To anyone else, it was paper. To me, it was proof that my story existed. When the judge rose, so did the room. I caught the faintest shimmer of light off the brass scales engraved above the bench. Balance. Not perfection, not erasure, just balance. Outside, reporters waited, cameras poised like predators of truth and rumor alike. Claire, the journalist who'd once called at dawn, met my eyes through the crowd. She didn't shout a question. She just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the story had found its ending. My advocate walked beside me. "You did it," he said. "I survived it," I corrected. My voice surprised me. Low, grounded, final. He smiled faintly. "That too." As we stepped into the sunlight, the warmth hit my face like release. For so long, light had meant exposure, the threat of being seen and misunderstood. But now it felt different. It wasn't interrogating me. It was freeing me. Behind us, the courthouse doors swung shut, muffling the last murmurs inside. I could still hear the echo of the gavel, steady, deliberate, rhythmic. She walked past, escorted by an officer. Her posture, once proud, had folded into something human. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Because pity is born from distance, and this story had lived too close to me for too long. One reporter called out, "Do you have a comment for the record?" I turned, met the lens, and said quietly, "Records speak for themselves." Then I kept walking. The street outside was lined with trees. Their leaves shimmered faintly, catching the sunlight as if applauding without sound. I clutched the folder tighter, not from fear, but gratitude. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was memory preserved. Justice doesn't erase pain, it redeems it. It takes chaos and gives it language, makes you say out loud what you once buried in silence. And though the verdict couldn't return what was lost, it gave something back I hadn't realized I missed: dignity. When I reached the steps, I paused. The courthouse clock struck noon. People passed, unaware that in this small pocket of time, a lifetime had closed its circle. I breathed in, exhaled, and whispered to no one, "It's done." The folder in my hand caught the sunlight again, edges glowing like quiet victory. The gavel echoed like a heartbeat ending grief. Regret arrived too late, in her handwriting. It came folded inside a plain envelope, the kind used for bank forms and condolences alike. The courier had no idea what he was delivering, just another delivery, another name on a list. But when I held it, something in its weight felt deliberate. The texture of the paper was rough, uneven along the edge as if she'd torn it from a larger pad. I turned it over twice before opening it. Inside, her script wavered across the page, ink pressed too hard, letters slanting into one another. The first line read, "I never wanted it to end this way." I sat by the window, light cutting across the table in angled strips. Dust shimmered in it, suspended like forgotten thoughts. My hands hesitated above the page, the texture pulling at my fingertips. She had written 4 pages. The first was defense disguised as explanation. The second cracked into confession. By the third, her tone changed entirely. Fewer justifications, more ghosts. "I thought exposing you would free me," she wrote. "Instead, it trapped me in my own lie. I kept pretending it was about truth, but it was envy. You had something I couldn't name, so I tried to break it." Her words bled slightly where the ink had pooled. I imagined her pausing mid-sentence, maybe wiping her eyes. Maybe not. The letter wasn't a plea. It was a reckoning written in cursive. I whispered into the stillness, "You always wrote better than you spoke." The clock on the wall ticked, a sound so faint it might have been imagined. For the first time, silence didn't sting. It settled. She continued, "They told me to apologize, but I'm not doing this for them. I saw you walk out of that courtroom, head high, folder in hand. I thought you'd look angry. You didn't. You looked free." I exhaled slowly, the air cool against my teeth. There it was, the line that mattered. Not the apology, not the remorse, but the acknowledgement. She'd seen what freedom looked like and realized she couldn't touch it anymore. Her final paragraph was barely legible, the ink thinning where tears must have fallen. "If there's a place where truth forgives us both, I hope we find it there someday. Until then, I'll live with what I did." I folded the paper once, then twice, as if symmetry could contain chaos. The sound was soft, almost reverent. My fingers brushed the surface, uneven, like skin healed over an old wound. I thought of the courtroom, the gavel, the sunlight that day. Everything that once felt raw now felt resolved. Across the room, the court document sat in its folder, reference entry 31C72, its edges crisp, its ink unmoved by time. I slid the folded letter beside it. The two belonged together, one written by justice, the other by regret. The witness who'd stood by me called that evening. "You got it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Are you okay?" "I am," I answered. And for once it was true. Forgiveness wasn't my duty anymore. It was my choice. I didn't need to mail a reply. Some stories close quietly, not with answers, but with the absence of anger. Outside, wind brushed against the glass, scattering the last light of the day. I glanced at the letter again, its folded spine catching a faint glow before dimming into shadow. I would keep it, not as proof, not as punishment, but as memory. Because even regret, when faced honestly, becomes evidence of change. I kept the letter, not the pain. New flowers grew where shame once stood. The garden sat on the edge of town, tucked behind a chapel that hadn't rung its bells in years. I came because the flyer said, "Memorial Garden for Mothers Who'd Lost Children." But really, I came because I needed to see if healing had a shape. The gate creaked when I pushed it open, its sound soft and aged. Beyond it, rows of blooms curved along narrow paths, each plant marked by a small stone. Names, initials, sometimes just a date. The sun warmed my shoulders as I knelt in the soil. The air carried the scent of earth after watering, rich, forgiving. Around me, women murmured to one another, their voices carrying fragments of stories that needed no explanations. No one asked questions here. Grief was its own language. I placed the small stone in front of me, smooth and pale. The letters carved shallow, 2 sets of initials, mine and the child's. The letters looked faint in the morning light, like memory caught between visibility and fading. The volunteer, an older man with kind eyes, handed me a trowel. "Take your time," he said. "I already have," I whispered, half smiling. The soil broke easily beneath my hands. Each handful felt like a small act of surrender, of making room for something new. Nearby, a woman in a blue scarf hummed quietly while planting marigolds. Another pressed a photograph, reference entry 18F47, into a small frame beside her flower bed. I caught a glimpse of the image, a child with a balloon, frozen mid-laughter. She noticed me looking and nodded once, as if to say, "We all know what we've lost." I laid the root of a white lily into the earth, steadying it with both palms. The light shifted, glancing off a nearby stone, and for a second, I thought I saw my reflection in its polished surface. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was acceptance, wearing my face. "Looks like it belongs here," the gatekeeper said quietly, standing a few steps away. "So do I replied, surprising myself with how certain it sounded. He smiled faintly. "That's what this place does. It reminds us that the ground still wants to hold us." A wind moved through the rows, stirring petals into soft motion. For a moment, the sound resembled breathing, the garden exhaling. The sunlight hit the lilies, their white petals almost glowing. I felt something loosen in my chest, a quiet echo of release. Every week, I returned. We tended to the blooms together, watering, trimming, sharing silence like prayer. Some brought tea, others photographs. I brought stories, not of loss, but of what survived it. Each time I touched the soil, the old shame receded further, replaced by something gentler, steadier. One morning, a child wandered in with her mother. She ran past me, laughing, her hands brushing the flowers. Her voice filled the air where sorrow once lingered. The mother called after her, laughing too. That sound, light and unbroken, stayed with me long after they left. I looked down at my small patch, where the lilies had begun to open. Between them, the stone caught the sun, warm to the touch. I placed my fingers on the carved initials and whispered, "We're okay now." No one heard me, but maybe the earth did. When I stood, the photo prints along the path glimmered under the light, their edges fluttering like breaths. The volunteer waved from a distance, and I waved back, dusting the soil from my hands. As I left, I turned once more to look at the garden. The wind had settled, but its memory lingered in the stillness. This wasn't an ending. It was a return. To peace, to belonging, to grace, shaped by grief. Some roots grow from grief into grace. Laughter returned, but this time, it was mine. Months had passed since the verdict, since the letter, since the garden. The house looked almost the same, but quieter. The lace curtains had been replaced, their edges trimmed clean, and sunlight pooled across the floor like a familiar visitor finally welcomed back. The living room, the place where so much had shattered, now felt like an entirely new space. The walls had stopped listening to pain. I stood by the window, coffee cooling in my hand, and let the light touch my face. For the first time, I didn't flinch. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, steady and unhurried. Its rhythm felt like proof that time had forgiven me. I glanced at it, 10:32 a.m., and smiled. Months ago, that same clock had mocked me, every tick a reminder of loss. Now, it simply measured peace. A knock came at the door. My colleague stepped in, holding 2 paper cups. "Thought I'd stop by before work," she said. "Congratulations on the promotion." Her voice carried ease, the kind of tone people use when the past no longer feels dangerous to mention. "Thank you," I said, taking the cup. The warmth seeped into my palms. "Feels strange, doesn't it? Moving forward." "Strange, maybe," she replied, "but you earned every bit of it." We sat on the couch, and for a moment silence filled the room, not the suffocating silence that once hung here, but a soft, living quiet. She looked around, noticing the framed photo on the shelf, reference ID 29E61, me and the team at the office, laughing mid-celebration. "You look happy there," she said. I am," I answered. She smiled, then hesitated. "Do you ever think about her?" I paused, tracing my finger along the rim of the cup. "Sometimes," I said. "But not with anger. More like remembering an old storm, how loud it was, and how calm the sky became afterward." The light shifted again, brightening the edges of everything, the walls, the coffee table, even the dust motes in the air. I caught my reflection in the window. Older, yes, but softer. Wiser, maybe. The bracelet on my wrist glimmered, a small silver band I'd bought myself after the hearing. The sunlight caught it just right, scattering faint patterns across the wall. I turned my wrist slowly, letting the reflection move like a pulse of life. "This," I said quietly, "is what healing looks like." She leaned back, thoughtful. "It suits you." Outside, the garden hummed with late spring. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter rose and fell, pure, unguarded. It slipped through the open window, folding into the still air of the room. And I laughed too, not the brittle sound that once hid my fear, but something fuller, a real laugh, shaped by survival and softened by grace. "I missed this," I said. My colleague nodded. "You sound like yourself again." Maybe that was true, or maybe I'd become someone new entirely. Either way, it felt right. I picked up my diary from the side table, flipping to the last page. The handwriting inside was neater than it used to be, the ink steady. I wrote one line and underlined it once. Some stories don't end, they turn toward light. Closing it, I felt no weight in my hands, only warmth. The clock struck 11, its chime echoing gently. The room, the window, the sunlight, all of it aligned in quiet harmony. The world had moved on, and I had moved with it. I looked toward the window once more, the light spilling in golden streaks. Somewhere deep inside, I realized I was no longer afraid of being seen. Her laughter once broke me. Mine rebuilt me.